A very good afternoon to all the students of class 11th political science. Students, as you know, we were doing the 6th chapter of our book Indian Constitution at Work, and in these 6 chapters we had already finished our 5 important parts of this new revised syllabus given by the CBSE now. So in the last video we were talking about judicial activism. Okay, so today the topic for this particular video is judicial overreach. Today we shall try to understand what do we understand by judicial overreach. As in the last 2-3 videos we had discussed about judicial review, judicial activism and judicial overreach, which we are going to discuss today. Apart from these 3 topics, we had already done why we need an independent judiciary. Then we saw some appointment of judges, what is the procedure for the appointment of judges, as well as procedure for the removal of judges of Supreme Court and High Court. Then we also saw the structure of our judiciary, and then finally we studied in detail about the jurisdiction of the judiciary. Okay, under which we basically focused on the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of India, which is the apex court if we talk about the structure of courts in India. So we saw the jurisdiction of our Supreme Court. In that we studied about the original, what do we understand by the jurisdiction as original. We then studied about the writs. Then we studied about appellate and as a advisory body to president. So we had completely understood the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. But after that we started a new topic, that was judicial review. So all these 3, judicial review, judicial activism and judicial overreach, they are interconnected with each other, and we will see it today how they are interrelated. Suppose this is one of the organ we are talking about. This is judiciary. Okay, so we have already studied about the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. As I told you about one original, then I told you appellate, and I told you about as advisory body and giving writs if there is a violation of fundamental rights of any individual citizen. So these were the, we can say, the jurisdiction of our Supreme Court or judiciary of our country. But then we studied about judicial review. This was the other power which is given to the Supreme Court or to the judiciary by Constitution of India, and we know what do we mean by this judicial review. It has the power to review any law, any draft, any bill which has been made by the legislature of any at the central level or at the state level. So this judiciary has the power to review it. If anything is against the spirit of our constitution or against the rights of the individual, it can call that law as unconstitutional or unacceptable. Okay, so this is the we studied under judicial review. Then we read about judicial activism. This is also a power given to judiciary by our constitution only, but in judicial activism we read that some of the activities where the judiciary becomes active when some functions within a society are not going on with the spirit of constitution, or the rights of the citizens are violated, at those places judiciary has to intervene. This is called judicial activism, where judiciary becomes active and within its territory tries to change make changes in the system of India. So this is a complete, we can say, jurisdiction or the power, or yes, jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, or we can say of the judiciary. But if Supreme Court tries to go beyond this limit, this is the limit of Supreme Court or judiciary of our country. So this is the limit. If judiciary tries and makes laws and changes beyond this particular thin wall and tries to make changes over here, this is called judicial overreach. This will be overreach when the judiciary in its functions and performing its powers will cross a certain limit which is beyond its territory and beyond its jurisdiction. It is called judicial overreach. Okay, and many situations and cases we have seen this situation where judiciary has crossed the limits beyond its territory. Okay, so we basically read about the laws and judiciary and its jurisdiction. Then we read about judicial review and judicial activism, but this is judicial overreach, which is not supposed to be the function of judiciary in our country. So if I talk about judicial review, it is positive in nature. It is for the good of for our citizens and for interpreting our constitution and protecting our constitution. If I talk about judicial activism, it is also called as positive in manner. This is also positive, this is also positive, whereas judicial activism is also for the welfare of the state, where judiciary tries to protect our citizens and protect our constitution within its territory. As well as if I talk about judicial overreach, this is negative in nature. Okay, and why it is negative? When judiciary come out beyond its limits, beyond its territory and functions, which is a territory maybe of, it may be a territory of executive or it may be a territory of legislature. And to maintain this separation of power, which has been the provision of our basic constitution, so this is to be maintained in a democracy. To maintain the democracy in our country, it is very important to maintain this separation of power between judiciary, between executive and between legislature, as different functions and powers have been provided to all these three organs of the government. Their functions are different, but they all are important in a democracy. So it is very important for judiciary to avoid this judicial overreach. Okay, now I will try and read some important points for you so that you can understand this concept properly. So the very first point is judicial overreach. The line between judicial activism and judicial overreach is very thin, as I have shown you here. This is judicial activism, and this is within this is judicial activism, and this is judicial overreach, and this is a thin line between these two. So this line should not be crossed by the judiciary. So that is why it's written, the thin line between judicial activism and judicial overreach is very thin. When judicial activism crosses its limits and becomes judicial adventurism, it is known as judicial overreach. As I told you, whenever judicial activism, while performing its functions, it crosses a basic limit within its territory, it crosses the limit, and the functions which are not under its jurisdiction, it is called judicial adventurism, and it is known as judicial overreach. The next important point where in this particular topic is when judiciary oversteps. This is the good adventurism. You have to underline this line, and here is another term used, oversteps. Whenever judiciary will overstep beyond its boundaries, beyond its jurisdiction, the power given to it, whatever the powers are given to it, but if judiciary oversteps those powers, it may interfere within the proper functioning of the legislature or the executive organ of the government. As I have shown you through this example, whenever judiciary will overstep its power, it means it will interfere in the functioning of executive or in the functioning of legislature, which is not a good sign for the democratic country like India. This is undesirable in any democracy, and this relation, or I would say interfering in one other's territory, is not a good sign and not a desirable situation in any of our democracy, neither in India or neither around the world. So next would be judicial overreach destroy the very spirit of separation of power. As I have also explained this with the help of the diagram, that judicial overreach destroy the very spirit of separation of power, which I showed you here. With this, when it will cross the limit, this thin line is crossed by the judiciary, it means it is destroying the spirit of separation of power, which is an important provision and important basic structure of our Constitution of India, that there is a separation of power among the three organs, and the first is judiciary, as you know, second is the executive, and third is the first is we can call it was legislature, executive, and judiciary. So all have the separate jurisdiction, all have the separate powers and functions. So this separation of power has to be maintained. If there is a situation like judicial overreach where judiciary oversteps its power, in this case it is destroying the very spirit of separation of power. So it has to be kept in mind while functioning its powers. some of the examples I have written down here of your judicial overreach. Okay. First, Allahabad High Court making it compulsory for all bureaucrats to send their children to government school. So how does it work? This High Court of Allahabad, it has made compulsory for the bureaucrats. We have already read about the bureaucrats when we were reading about the executive. They are the government employees who work for the executive, and they are the permanent employees, and they help the government to execute the plans and policies for the welfare of the state. So it was made compulsory for all the bureaucrats of Allahabad through the Allahabad High Court that their children should study in government school. So this is actually called judicial overreach. This is not the function and the work of the Supreme Court or the High Court to look into these matters. Okay. Misuse of power to punish the contempt of court. Anyone can be punished if they are making contempt of court. So we can say this is a misuse of the power. Instead of these things, the court and the judiciary should have function and focus on the main aims and areas and jurisdictions which have been given to them by the constitution, instead of involving them in the unnecessary events. Third example I have taken here, the directions given by Supreme Court in 2016. Some directions were given by the Supreme Court in 2016 to mandatory. It was made compulsory in to play national anthem in cinema halls. Whenever we go to watch movies in the cinema halls, so it was made compulsory by the Supreme Court in 2016 that they should play the national anthem before starting a movie. And this case was between Shyam Narayan Choksi versus Union of India, or we can say Government of India. So these are not the I would say domain and the functioning zones of judiciary. So they should not waste their time, energy and power. Ways forward, there are some ways given. Judiciary needs to understand the thin line between judiciary activism, judicial overreach. This I have explained you why it is important to understand the thin line. They should not cross that line, and they should not overstep the powers and limitations which they have been given by the constitution. The concept of separation, this should be kept in mind, that this concept of separation of power should be considered while judiciary is functioning and working with its power. That functions of legislature and functions of executive and functions of judiciary, there is a separation of power, and this power should be maintained to maintain the democracy in our country. Next, judiciary needs to be accountable, and for this some new methods may be adopted by the government. It is here, judiciary needs to be accountable, where people again ask that what decisions are made on which grounds, on which provisions of the constitution. So government can take few steps, can make few laws which can be implemented by the executive, where judiciary may be accountable to the citizens. Okay, so it is very much important for each of the organs, legislative, executive or legislature, to keep a check and balance on each other, as we cannot say that this organ is more powerful or that organ is more powerful or it has less power. All the three organs are equally important. It's just that their areas of functioning and jurisdictions are different, and they are important for each other as well. Without one or the other organ, we cannot function properly. Okay, with this we come to the end of this particular topic and end of this chapter. Thank you.